Fireside Tales. Hello, I'm Merlin, Mililli. Welcome to my fireside, where we almost always get weird. Tell weird tales within tales. And we drink coffee. Drink coffee from my skull mug because I'm a deadhead. Every week here at Fireside Tales, I've been telling the story of the Grateful Dead as it was told to me by a deadhead, by a fire. And not just because I'm a deadhead. I tell this story because it's a story about reincarnation. And every week here at Fireside Tales, we've been talking about reincarnation. And I'm a firm believer in reincarnation. And most Buddhists believe in reincarnation. The faith sort of sits on that foundation of reincarnation. So the story of the Grateful Dead is from the Tibetan Book of the Dead. It's a Buddhist story. And the Buddhists believe in reincarnation. So I think that is what it is about. The Grateful Dead named their band, in case you don't know, the Grateful Dead is a band, 60s psychedelic rock band. They got their name from a Funkin' Wagnall's dictionary that just listed, strangely, albeit, the Grateful Dead as a collection of stories or a story in the Tibetan Book of the Dead. So they thought it sounded cool, and it does. And it's a cool story. So I'm going to go ahead and tell you the story of the Grateful Dead. Like I said, as it was told to me from a deadhead by a fire. I think I have to poke my fire, though. Still pretty warm and still fire season here in California. We're going to talk about fire safety. I think I need to put another log on. I really didn't want to build much of a fire today, but I guess I have to put something on here. So, pardon me. The story of the Grateful Dead. Once, there was a traveler. The traveler happened upon a small village. she got to the center of the village, she noticed a dead body. And above the dead body, all these people were standing around arguing. The traveler stopped and thought that it was rather disrespectful to argue over a dead body, and wanted to know what they were arguing about. She found out that they were arguing over the dead man's debts, and my cats are playing chess. That's not what they were arguing over. If you heard that noise, that was my cat knocking over a chess piece. He's playing chess by himself, or maybe with the other cat. Nonetheless, where were we? The traveler was in the village. There was a dead body. People were squabbling over the dead body. The traveler stopped the squabbling and said, please do not argue over this dead man's body, and paid for a proper burial, paid for the dead man's debts, prayed over the dead man's grave, and she traveled on. And one day, decades later, the traveler, same traveler from the beginning of the story, happens upon a life or death situation. And out of nowhere, a stranger just scoops her up and saves her life. The traveler is astonished and grateful, and she says, thank you, and who are you, and where did you come from, and why did you save my life? And the stranger simply says, I am the Grateful Dead. It was the dead man that she'd paid the debts of. And paid for a proper burial and prayed over his grave. I think there's something to the praying over the grave part of the story. I think it's one of those necessary parts of the spirit being able to move on. I think we need to pray over our loved ones' graves. I think everybody needs somebody to pray over their grave. That man obviously didn't have anyone, but then he did. So he was able to move on. I think there's really something to that little tidbit. It's always included the praying. I've never heard the story where the praying wasn't done. The paying of the debts was also done, but the praying is always something that I thought was important and interesting. So I think it's a story about reincarnation. Some people have thought that it's a corpse at the end that saves her life, but corpses don't save lives. Some people think it's a zombie, but zombies don't save lives. And reincarnation doesn't work that way. Reincarnation, the soul carries on. The body dies and is buried or whatever, and then the soul moves into another body, but a baby body, a new body that they've been assigned through some sort of divine system. Every week I've been talking also about these... Oh, well, first I have to tell you about the Akashic Records. I was going to talk about my threads, every week I do talk about threads that I seem to have from one life to the next that connect all my lives. I've been able to have access to a meditative place other people have written about. I didn't make it up. It's called the Akashic Records, or the Akasha. It's an ancient meditative library that you can reach only through meditation. And I go there with my spirit guides and I look at my book. In the library, every spirit, every soul has a book, and it catalogs where, who, when you've been. And not everybody's book is big and dusty and old like mine. And I think that's because I've also been a medium and a psychic throughout my lives. That's one of my threads. And the spirits have a theory that they talk about kind of regularly. And it's not so much a theory anymore. I haven't been able to disprove it. In the spiritual realm, they think that if you're reincarnated, you've also been murdered. So I don't have any evidence to disprove that theory. In fact, I've only been finding evidence to prove it more. Like when I didn't think I'd been murdered, I'd gone back in the book and looked, and I was for sure murdered. So I find that quite interesting. So I have all these threads, these different things that connect each life. Things that I was, or things that I was interested in, like being a medium and a psychic. I was a medium and a psychic throughout each of my lives in my book. I also would have been murdered each of my lives in my book if the spirits are right. And music is a big thread throughout all of my lives. I'm a musician now. So, in our first season, I talked about each of my lives in my book, in the Akashic Records. And now in the second season, we've gone back to my very first life in my book, and we're moving through her life in kind of more detail. So we've gone back 10,000 years, give or take, and started this season on Little Flower. That's who I was in my first life in ancient Peru, Machu Picchu area. I was born in a field of flowers at my mother's request. My mother was a healer 10,000 years ago. So no hospitals, no doctors, no nurses, no epidural. My poor mom. I didn't have epidural with my son, though. It's overrated. So, my father was also a healer, and he was also the chief of the tribe. So I told you about my parents already in other episodes this season, and I'm going to kind of back off discussing them so much so I have time to discuss the different things about Little Flower that I need to discuss. And I want to discuss fire safety. It's very important. It's fire season out here in California, and it's due to come back in Australia in a minute, and we need to be uber careful. The planet is warming on a level I've never seen or experienced, and makes me a little panicky. But nonetheless, we need to be careful despite our apocalyptic weather forecasts. We need to be careful. I have water in the kettle on the fire. I have water in my cauldron, and I have water in the spigot in the sink in the next room. So we're watered. If you have a fire outside, you can you want to have water. You should have water even by a fire outside, but if you're limited to how much water you can have, you should also have a shovel. You should have a shovel anyway. A shovel and a bucket of dirt is also good to have by your fire. You should have a shovel, bucket of dirt, and a bucket of water by your fire outside, regardless. And you should always put rocks around it. Check for branches that might hang above. You want that rock ring to be clear to the sky. Totally clear to the sky. Don't want anything hanging over because that can catch fire. You don't want any grasses growing around that could catch, and you don't want that. The grasses here are really dry right now. Everything's so dry. We need to be careful. But we also need to be careful. One of my threads, and something that we discuss every week, is also meditation. And we need to be careful when we meditate, and we need to do it properly. I've been discussing smudging. This is dried sage. I like to burn it in ritual to represent air, because see how it's smoky. But then you also want to use the smoke. You can use the smoke to cleanse your aura. And this is one of my threads. I've been doing this with sage for 10,000 years. And it started with Little Flower, and that's one of the reasons why I shared this with you. You want to make sure not to catch yourself on fire or anything else. You just want to cleanse your aura. So I have water here for the smudge stick to be able to put it out if I need to. They call it a smudge stick. They call that smudging. I didn't make it up. Well, I might have when I was Little Flower, but I don't think I did, actually. I mentioned how she taught, and she taught mostly meditation. So what she taught was already taught to her. So it came from somewhere. It wasn't just willy-nilly stuff she made up. So, smudging, grounding. We also discussed grounding, which is when you blow all your negative energy out with your breath, obviously. Then you think an uber positive thought and blow out positive energy. So I do both smudging and grounding before I meditate, before I read tarot or runes, before I astral travel, before I do a ritual. During the ritual, I use the sage as my air representation. I'm a druid, by the way. Sort of another thread. I've always been an earth worshiper. Even Little Flower was an earth worshiper. So the people of ancient Peru, Little Flower and her tribe, used astral travel. They used it for stargazing. So another thread of mine is stargazing, astral travel, and today we're going to discuss one of my threads, and that is angels. I remember learning in this life, in this body, from some random video about Mayans or ancient Native American people. I lived in Peru in this life I'm discussing today, and it may have been on Peru or on Mayans, but I saw some sort of documentary learning about these ancient angels that were painted on cave walls, and star people that were painted on cave walls, and other people with wings painted on cave walls. But these people, even in the documentary, were said to visit and communicate through the roofs of these weird, like, Pueblo houses. But the houses I remember from being Little Flower. And they weren't really houses. They were sort of these small holes in the ground. I don't know, enough to fit a person through, right? But not any more than that. Like a small person. And that's it. So they had ladders, and then they led down into these big empty chambers, like a room or an apartment, I guess you could say. And, you know, the hole served as a door and a chimney, and to communicate with these angels. They had another name. They called them by another name in the documentary that I watched in this life, but I can't for the life of me find that name, and I cannot remember it. So we'll just call them angels, because that's what they are. And you know, I remember them, and I remember this house, and that's all from my book. And it's not really a reading thing. You just go to, like, say for Little Flower, I'll go right to the very beginning, and then I just touch the book. And I have a memory. I remember being hurt, and I remember her feelings and her, you know, like it's as if I'm her again. So in my book, there's this weird watermark. And everything before the watermark is dry and light and sandy. And everything after the watermark is wet and dark and muddy. So it also seems to mark when BC changed to AD, which is just basically marking recorded time. What I think the watermark marks in my book is, I think it marks the Great Flood. And I think the whole planet flooded. And I think we had recorded history, but it was all gone due to the flood. After the flood, then we started writing stuff down. Nearly every culture has record of a flood, a big one. Anyway, before the flood in my book, before this watermark, my lives were strangely long. And then after the watermark, they got much shorter. So that I think Little Flower lived for possibly thousands of years. I know that sounds ridiculous, but there's a king's list. It's carved into stone. It actually records the same thing. And it says the kings, like, for a certain time period, they lived for thousands of years. It's recorded on the stone. And then after a certain time period, they have much shorter lives. I think it's from the flood. So I remember these houses. And we would leave notes, gifts, offerings on the ladder up at the top of the hole, generally in the area of this little entrance to our homes. We would leave communication for these angels that would come at night, and they would leave communication for us. And I remember this being a nightly thing, and if I lived for thousands of years and did this every night, I mean, it sticks with a person. I remember it being kind of like Christmas every night. We got these cool messages or some cool gift or some sort of really cool information every night. It wasn't just once a year or twice a year. It was every night. So this was 10,000 years ago. So there's no one to disbelieve or poo-poo this communication. It seemed normal to me as Little Flower in the moment. absorbing from my book, the remembering it's rather intense because we don't communicate with angels today. Not like these people did. And it wasn't just Little Flower that did this communication every night. It was everyone. Everyone was communicating with these angels every night. So we don't communicate with angels in this way today, but could we? Are we just limited by our own belief systems? I still communicate with angels, and I talked about some of these communications on my other show, the Love Show, when I was doing research for our Is Love Angels show. I did some angel writing. Have you ever done this? It's really cool. It took me a couple of tries, and you should summon a specific angel. I used Gabriel. It worked out real well. It was really cool. So, angels are love, by the way, according to Gabriel. And it was really cool. If you ever get a chance to try. It took me a couple of tries, but once it worked, it was really cool. It was really cool. So, we should all talk to angels regularly. They're there. They haven't left us. Speaking of angels, I believe they have a band. I would like to join someday when I get to heaven. And I just want to say a little prayer for Loretta Lynn. She has passed. Blazed a trail for other women in music, and I'm grateful. Oh, rest in peace, Loretta. Oh, I don't want to cry. No crying, no crying. Okay, keep it together. Oh, a couple of tears. Good thing I have waterproof mascara on. So, I was singing every week David Crosby's Deja Vu. And because it was the only song that I knew that had anything to do with reincarnation. Not that I think that Deja Vu is really anything to do with reincarnation. I think the phenomena of deja vu, that little snippet of time that goes exactly how you've seen it before, that little moment, I think that comes from our dreams. I don't think that comes from our past life experiences. But that experience of being somewhere that you've never actually been, but you've been there. Being somewhere where you know what's around the next corner. You know what that building looked like 100 years ago. That feeling, that I've been here before, but you've not been there before. That is from past life experience. That deja vu, that That's from past life experience. But now I'm not singing David Crosby's Deja Vu on Fireside Tales anymore. I'm singing my song, Before. Not Before Deja Vu. Before is the name of the song. So I'm going to go ahead and sing that for you and not catch my song on fire. There's even little snippets of music from past lives and before. So that's about it for me today. Try some angel writing. It's really cool. We should talk to angels more. They're really smart and loving and kind. I believe in angels. I send you off with angels. Have a weird and wonderful weekend. Thanks for starting it with us. A Mililli Studios production.